The night shift at St. Anne's Hospital had barely begun when chaos ripped through the emergency wing. Fluorescent lights flickered against peeling walls as nurses fought to steady an unconscious older man whose heartbeat stuttered across the monitor. At the end of the corridor, Bella Henderson, thin, breathless, her pregnancy drawing tight against her ribs, froze the moment she saw his face. The man collapsing in front of everyone was the same stranger she had fed with her last $7 only a day earlier. A guard shouted for space, pushing back onlookers. Bella pressed a hand to her belly, whispering, "He can't die, not after yesterday." Nurse Carla snapped, "Bella, sit down, your blood pressure's crashing." But Bella shook her head, eyes locked on the stretcher. "I owe him more than a meal." Then the automatic doors slammed open. A tall man in a tailored suit strode in, panic cutting through his composure the instant he saw the patient. "Dad," he gasped. The hallway fell silent. And in that silence, Bella realized a truth that made her knees give out. The starving man she saved was the father of a billionaire, now fighting for his life. What happens next will upend everything she thought she knew. If this story pulls you in, like the video and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales for more gripping human stories. The stretcher disappeared behind swinging doors, leaving the hallway vibrating with fear. Bella Henderson stood frozen, one hand bracing her stomach, the other trembling at her side as the monitors inside the trauma room shrieked like alarms warning of a life slipping away. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cold and unforgiving, catching the sheen of sweat on her forehead. Everything around her blurred into motion, nurses racing past, rubber soles skidding on the tile, orders shouted in sharp bursts. But all Bella saw was the gaunt face of the man she fed when she had nothing but $7 crumpled left in her pocket. Inside the emergency room, the old man's breathing fractured into shallow bursts. Outside, Bella whispered to herself, "Please hold on. I didn't help you just to lose you." Her voice cracked, and Nurse Carla glanced back with a tight frown. "You shouldn't be on your feet," Carla muttered. "Pregnant, dehydrated, barely eating. Do you want to collapse in the hall?" Bella swallowed hard. "I'll rest when I know he's safe." Carla's expression softened for a moment, but duty pulled her away again. The tension in the corridor thickened until the air felt too heavy to breathe. Then the doors slammed open and the tall man in the tailored suit, Alexander Grant, strode in. His polished shoes clicking against the floor like hammer blows. His face drained the instant he recognized the patient inside. "Dad," he choked out. "What happened to him?" A security guard stepped between him and the trauma room. "Sir, you can't go in." "I said that's my father." Alexander's usually controlled voice cracked like glass. His shout drew every eye in the hallway, including Bella's. She watched the man's expensive coat, his immaculate haircut, his watch worth more than 6 months of rent, and wondered how someone with so much could allow his father to starve on the street. A bitter ache rose in her chest, part disbelief, part anger. Her fingers curled slightly as if trying to hold the question in place. Alexander finally noticed her staring. His brows pulled together. "Do you know him?" "What happened to my father?" Bella hesitated, breath thin. "He hadn't eaten. I gave him what I had. That's all." A muscle twitched in Alexander's jaw. "You expect me to believe my father was begging for food?" "I don't expect you to believe anything," she replied quietly. "I just told you what happened." Before he could press further, the trauma doors burst open again. The lead doctor barked orders, pushing past Alexander without looking up. In the chaos, a new voice sliced through the air. "Well, look what we have here." A man in a green hospital vest sneered from behind the check-in counter. His nameplate read Rogers, and his smile was sharp enough to cut. "No wonder the place smells like trouble. First a homeless man, now a girl who can't pay her bills leaning on our walls." Bella stiffened. Rogers had always been quick to judge her whenever she came for prenatal checks. His words sliding between rules and hostility. "You can't stand there," he added. "Patients need to keep the area clear." "I am a patient," Bella answered, steady but strained. "Barely." Rogers muttered loud enough for nearby staff to hear. Hospital charity cases don't count. Carla spun toward him. Enough, she snapped. She's on our list. And she's pregnant. Show some respect. But Rogers only shrugged. Respect isn't free. Alexander's head swung sharply toward him. Is this how you speak to people here? Rogers didn't flinch. Sir, unless you're paying for her care, I suggest you stay out of it. Alexander's eyes hardened, but the trauma alarm blared again, dragging his attention back to his father. The room dissolved into a frantic tangle of nurses, machines, and shouted numbers. Hours crawled by. Bela's legs trembled with exhaustion, but she refused to lie down. She kept replaying yesterday, how the old man's hands had shaken as he ate, how he had whispered blessings through tears, how she had felt a strange, quiet warmth in helping someone who had nothing left. Now she felt that warmth slipping into fear. Just past midnight, a wail broke through the hallway. A nurse rushed out, her voice tight as she called for a crash cart. Alexander staggered back, gripping a chair to steady himself. Bela felt her heart drop. No, not after everything. Minutes later, the chaos softened into a strained murmur. The doctor stepped into the hall, eyes weary. Alexander approached first. Is he? Alexander's voice barely rose above a whisper. He's stabilized, the doctor said. But he wouldn't have survived the night without whatever meal he received earlier. Whoever fed him, saved him. The doctor shifted his gaze to Bela. Alexander followed it, his expression wavering between shame and gratitude. You did that? He asked quietly. Bela rubbed her palms, raw, cold, trembling. It was just food. No, Alexander said, voice thick. It was life. But the relief didn't last long. Rogers stalked forward, waving a clipboard. She still hasn't paid her outstanding balance, he announced loudly. And if she can't resolve that, she needs to leave tonight. Carla whipped around. Rogers, she almost collapsed in the hall. Not my problem, he snapped. Rules are rules. A murmur of disapproval rippled through the staff, but Rogers thrived on the tension. If you can't afford to stay, he said to Bela, go home. Or wherever people like you go. People like you. The words stung hotter than the overhead lights. Bela steadied herself against the wall, breath hitching. Alexander stepped forward. She stays. Rogers scoffed. And you're paying. I'm covering her entire bill, Alexander said firmly. And I'm filing a complaint with hospital administration first thing in the morning. Rogers' face slackened for a moment, but his bitterness clung to him like a stain. Do what you want, he spat. She still doesn't belong here. Alexander didn't answer. He simply turned his back to Rogers, guiding Bela toward a chair with a gentleness she wasn't expecting. Sit, he urged. You've done enough standing for a lifetime today. But Rogers wasn't finished. As he walked away, he muttered, some people only survive because others are stupid enough to help them. His voice carried farther than he intended. Carla froze mid-step. Another nurse glared. Alexander's fists clenched. And Bela closed her eyes. She had heard words like that before. Too many times. From neighbors, from her landlord, from strangers who judged a pregnant woman walking alone. But tonight something inside her shifted. She felt anger, yes, but also clarity. She wasn't the one failing. The system was. By morning, the hospital director arrived, alerted by Alexander's formal complaint. He reviewed security footage, interviewed staff, and spoke privately with several patients. What emerged wasn't a single incident but a pattern. A long, documented trail of Rogers insulting low-income mothers, turning away homeless patients, and manipulating paperwork to avoid serving those he deemed not worth the resources. By noon, security escorted Rogers through the hospital lobby. His vest was gone. His badge turned in. His protests echoed through the hallway. You can't do this. I worked here for 8 years. You're ruining my life because of some nobody. The director didn't pause. We're removing you, he said evenly, Because you forgot what your job was. Roger's face twisted in humiliation as bystanders watched him pushed out into the parking lot. Carla exhaled a breath she'd been holding for months. Nurses exchanged looks of relief. And Bela finally smiled. Not because she enjoyed anyone's downfall, but because this time the world had chosen to protect her instead of stepping on her. Justice, for once, had landed exactly where it needed to. Alexander approached her gently. He won't bother you again. No, Bela said quietly. He won't bother anyone again. She rested a hand on her belly, feeling a soft movement inside. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders dropped from their constant tension. She wasn't safe yet. Not from poverty, not from uncertainty. But she wasn't alone either. The old man survived. Rogers didn't. And Bela, fragile, hungry, exhausted, stood a little taller, knowing the story wasn't finished. Because the next chapter would append everything once more. When the hospital quieted again, Bela stood by the exit, watching sunlight wash across the sidewalk. For the first time in months, her shoulders felt light. She had walked through fear, judgment, and exhaustion, yet something inside her had shifted, quiet but unmistakable. She realized she no longer moved through the world apologizing for her existence. She moved forward knowing her choices carried weight. Alexander approached, still processing everything he had nearly lost and everything he had gained. "My father wants to see you," he said gently. "He knows you didn't owe him anything. None of this was your responsibility." Bela nodded, her voice steady. "Maybe not. But sometimes doing the right thing is the only thing we have left." As she stepped outside, the wind lifted the edge of her worn coat, carrying with it the scent of early morning. Cars rolled past, people hurried by, unaware of the quiet storm she had survived. Yet Bela felt grounded, rooted in a truth she hadn't known she possessed. Strength grows when no one is watching, and truth rises even when others try to silence it. She looked up at the sky, soft blue and unbroken, and allowed herself a small smile. Her path wasn't easy, but it was hers, and now it finally felt like enough. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales to help us bring more real human stories to the world.